is Tarik Talk. Your host, Tarik Mendez, takes you on a journey with guests from all around the world. Broadcasting around the world. Around the world. This is Tarik Talk.
Guys, today I'm here with Jaiquan. Jaiquan, how are you today?
I'm okay. How are you?
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. We're here today at Silver Art Projects. You're one of the first artists from this term that I'm interviewing. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Do you mind sharing your Instagram and website with us, please?
My Instagram is Jaiquan_Fayson.
Okay.
And my website is jaiquanfayson.com.
Perfect. Awesome. Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
I am currently, I would be considered an up-and-coming artist. I'm relatively new to contemporary art, and I'm an art educator. I'm also an art teacher.
Oh, wow.
So I'm a certified New York State art teacher. I'm one of the justice impacted artists and the Silver Art program. So I'm formerly incarcerated, and yeah, I've had to work a little bit harder and navigate a little bit to find my way here and to move beyond my circumstances. So I have completed my master's at the School of Visual Arts in 2023.
Oh, wow, congrats.
Thank you. And I'm just here, just trying to move away from what I've been doing in the past, more illustration, and move more toward contemporary art.
Oh, wow. And I have to say your work is amazing.
Thank you.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your creative process, please?
So currently I'm working on again trying to move beyond fine art, which would be considered more portraiture and sort of painting, more traditional art, and trying to move more towards a more contemporary aesthetic, exploring mediums, exploring surfaces, exploring objects, and just having more of a variety of expression, of visual expression, and less of a focus on solely just my ability to paint and my ability to draw or my ability to sculpt.
And have you always been an artist, like from when you were young? Have you always had that interest in drawing and creating art?
I have been drawing since I can probably remember being able to think.
Oh, wow, really?
So I drawing is probably intrinsically a part of who I am.
Oh, nice.
So drawing is my foundation. So I think in the past I've dealt with issues of whether or not I would consider myself an artist, or in some cases just someone who knows how to draw. So again, I'm trying my hardest to move, not trying my hardest, but I'm trying to move more towards expressing myself in a particular way and beyond just being someone who knows how to draw.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. And can you tell us a little bit about your studio practice? When you come in the studio, are you an artist that you get to work right away, or do you kind of have to meditate, read the newspaper, have a coffee, or can you just dive right in?
I tend to be a bit more, I wouldn't say disorganized, but a little bit more cluttered because of, as an artist, I'm a little bit more physical. And I like to, in the past, I've also worked with my hands. I've done some work as a handyman, and I really like the idea of actually feeling something of I've also worked as a sculptor. So a lot of times when I'm working, it's a lot more physical. I'm moving around, I'm moving things from space to space, and sometimes my studio tends to get cluttered. So generally when I come in, I try to clean off my table as much as possible so I can get started. And from there, I usually get to work.
Oh, nice. And then when you're creating like sculptures and paintings, are you creating like each one like from start to finish, or do you kind of like move around from like one painting to the other, like one medium to the other? Are you more like strict, like where you like to start and finish each piece, or you more have fun with it?
Well, my work is my art is I try to be a little bit more thoughtful,
Uh-huh.
and I try to pack as much information as I can, if possible, into my work.
Mhm.
So I do tend to bounce around from piece to piece. Sometime I need time to be able to think and to be able to see the work, to pull back, to step back and focus on what I'm doing and not be. I think unfortunately sometimes I get a little bit self assured
Mhm.
that because I know how to draw, that the work you know looks good while I'm working. So often, and I work with oil paint.
Uh-huh.
So often I need time to let the painting dry and time to pull back again so I can see what exactly is going on and what I can improve or what I can add or what I can subtract, to make the painting work a bit better. So it's very rare that I'm working, that I work from start to finish on one project. And a lot of times most of my projects tend to affect each other in some way.
Mhm.
I try to make things a bit more harmonious.
Mhm.
So if I am working on a series, I'll work on maybe two or three pieces within the series at the same time, and that gives me also a space where I can say, maybe this is working a little bit better, and this one isn't, or maybe I can take some ideas from this and add them, or just gives me a lot of room to edit.
Okay. That was actually going to be my next question. So, let's say like when you start a painting and it's maybe not turning out the way you want it to be, do you ever like transfer to like a sculpture or vice versa? Like if something doesn't work out for like one type of medium, do you like to use that for another type of medium?
Well, I haven't exactly done that yet.
Mhm.
I think, and I do have instances where, for instance, there's a painting back here, a
Mhm.
drawing back here that we can't. I don't know. I'm not sure if we can see it yet, but that initially started out as a drawing that I was going to turn into a painting,
Mhm.
and then I realized I'm drawing a sculpture that
Oh,
I'm coming up with this sculpture in my
yeah.
mind, and the idea was to have a painting of a sculpture.
Oh, wow.
But at some point I said, you know what, I can actually sculpt. So why wouldn't I just
Yeah.
actually sculpt it, and have it there? And if I needed to use it as a model, I can also use it as a model.
Oh, nice.
So in some instances, there's some overlap between my ability to sculpt and using my sculpture as my models. I'm also still working somewhat as an illustrator.
Mhm.
I'm once again I'm up and coming, so I have to be able to pay my bills, be able to
Yeah.
pay rent, and in many cases, I use my own models. I have some clay models here. I use my own models as reference,
Oh, wow. Okay.
for lighting, for anatomy, for all sorts of things.
Oh, that's dope. And then, like throughout day to day, are you always thinking creatively, or are you able to like kind of disconnect a little bit from like the creative side of your brain, or are you always like coming up with ideas and thinking creatively?
I Art is probably is probably is the biggest chunk of my life.
Hmm.
So I think once I start, you know, during the day thinking about my what I need to work on next. There's maybe two ways of thinking about how I'm gonna go about it. In some ways, I'm thinking creatively and thinking about ideas and how can I represent those ideas and have those ideas more established. And then another way, I'm thinking about the actual process. Like I may be on a train. I do a lot of drawing on a train, and I'm that guy that's like
Oh,
staring
wow.
at people.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I'm looking at people for like skin color or like lighting or different aspects of painting or sculpting that I can incorporate into my work to improve my work. But that's different from thinking creatively in a way where I'm trying to solve a problem that I feel like an aesthetic problem of my work, like how my work communicates to other people, or how I can show an idea as opposed to a technique.
Hmm.
So
That's pretty dope. And I have a question. A lot of like young artists write to me to ask future artists that I interview about this.
yes,
Which I think is an interesting question. A lot of them, like, they say they struggle with going to like the studio and then creating a piece of art, and then the piece of art not turning out how they thought it would be in their, like, from their brain to physical, and then getting frustrated. They, some of them break it, some of them come back to the next day. How does that work for you? Are you able to, like, if like the project you're working on is not going as you thought, are you able to just kind of like say, okay, I'll come back tomorrow, or do you kind of like break it like some people do? What is that like for you?
for me, my work, my artist takes a bit longer, but for that reason, I tend to be a lot more patient, and I work with materials that I think are more forgiving. I work with oil paint. Um, I work with sculpture, uh, and I tend to work with, again, materials that can be modified, over time.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I use Roma plastilina clay.
Okay.
It's a non-hardening clay,
Hmm.
and it can be reused, and it gives me the opportunity to, if I need to modify something, I can just remove clay. I can just add more clay, and I can I can have a sculpture sitting for a week, 2 weeks, without touching it, and
Yeah.
giving me the time to take a look and not rush. A lot of my work is also has a component of being patient. I think sometimes I may look at a work and either be happy with it or not be completely satisfied with it, and then you come back 3 or 4 days later and you take a look and like, wow, I did that. I didn't realize it was that good. So I think you have to be forgiving of yourself and also of the work,
That's beautifully said.
and then you also have to be willing to persevere.
Yeah.
So I think I have like kind of an example here. This is a painting that I did recently for a movie, and it's gonna be like the poster for the movie.
Oh, congrats.
I'm still working somewhat again as an illustrator, and these are these are basically just the same painting, but a different angle.
Yeah.
And one is a little bit more complete than the other one. One is a little bit more finished than the other, but it's a similar feeling of I'm not the type of person who would immediately get frustrated and say, what, I need to start over. I'll put one down and start a new painting, and while this one is drying, I can come back eventually and say, well, I have the option now to work on this one or work on that one, and to keep going.
So
So
amazing. And then, how do ideas come to you? Like, going back to your creative process, like, do ideas come to you like during the day? Like, do you prefer getting creative like during the day, during the night, or whenever inspiration comes to you?
I am very much a night person.
Yeah.
I'm a very much a
What's your
nighttime
sign?
person. I'm a Cancer.
Oh, you're a Cancer again.
So I mean, ideas come to me generally through inspiration about and in several ways. It could be a book.
Mhm.
It could be looking at someone else's work. We went to the Armory show recently. I went to the Armory show recently, and it was my first time being at an event like that, and just seeing what was possible. Sometimes you look at work and you say, what, that may be a little simple, or it may be too complex, But for me, the idea that someone else can accomplish some of these things inspires me to feel like I can accomplish, what I want to accomplish. And the creative process for me is different. I'm also drawing ideas from a lot of different places. I'm with a lot of my work that I'm currently showing, and that I want to push more towards. It's very layered in a way of having a lot of as much information as possible. So I want to be able to combine not just my ability to draw and paint, but also my experience as an artist, what I like as an artist, what artists inspire me. My experience as a human being is also very important, and also trying to communicate, trying to find a way to communicate that isn't. So when I do illustration, it's a little bit more of what they call on the nose. I'm trying to give you the story, and I'm hoping that you can see this and immediately say, all right, I see what this is about. I get it, and have that information in that way. It's kind of like a stop sign. You should know immediately when you see this to stop, as opposed to working in a more contemporary art way where you're hoping that two things happen. You're hoping that someone can look at it and find somewhere that they can relate to it, an entry point for them and within their own, within their own mind, but then also that it's not so on the nose, that they're willing to ask questions, that they're willing to look a little bit deeper, that they want to look deeper, that they want to discover more about the work, that they want to discover more about the artist, that they want to find something that they can relate to, or something that they can understand, or even something that they don't understand, and that they're willing to, again, explore and find out more about it.
That's pretty dope. And do you like that interaction with the viewer, like seeing other people see your work and tell you what they see within your work, or do you kind of just like to observe people and see them admire your work from afar?
Well, again, I'm relatively new. I'm an up and coming artist, and I've been in a few shows, and I think one of the great things about being at the Silver Art program, is that I do have a lot of people who come in and take a look at the work and ask questions, and just generally people who are interested in the work here. Before I worked here, I was in my studio in Bushwick, and it was a great studio. It was a very nice space, and I really enjoyed the space. But it was also in the basement. It was kind of not, and it was in Bushwick. It's a great location, but it's also not being in the World Trade Center. Where people are like, you're on the 28th floor in the World Trade Center. They want to be here. So in the past, it was a little bit more challenging to get people to come in to see my work. And here, where it comes across as a bit more prestigious, it's really good to be able to have people come in and take a look at the work. And I'm still at the point of trying to figure out how I can get people to talk about my work. How I can influence them to find out what it is they feel about it without going into a conversation and trying to explain it to them. So there's some times where I get a bit excited, and I'm like, look, I did this, and I want to, talk about it and explain it, and how I got from point A to point B. But more recently, again, especially moving into a more contemporary art sense, I would love for people to come in and be able to tell me, how they feel about my work and what they think about it.
That's beautifully said. And can you share with us some future projects you have coming up, or anything you're working on at the moment?
So I am currently working on, I'm not sure if we can see it here, but more recently, again, moving into a more contemporary art sense, I'm showing at the Center for Art and Advocacy Gallery, a new gallery that opened very recently, and the show closes very soon. It's been up for a few months, but it closes on the 20th. Thank you. It's a group show, and I've been working on these prison mirrors. These are actual prison mirrors.
Oh wow!
And I was able to source these online. They're pretty difficult to get, unless you have, I guess, like particular clearance.
Yeah.
If you have to work in law enforcement. So I was very fortunate to be able to get them. And again, I just want to be able to explore mediums, explore different surfaces. I'm using an older medium. It's tempera grassa. It's basically oil paint, but it's mixed with egg yolk.
Oh, okay.
So it's very old. It's an ancient ancient medium, but it lasts forever.
Yeah.
It lasts. I mean, not forever, but it lasts a relatively long time. There are paintings from the Renaissance that from before the Renaissance that are still here, and because of the egg yolk, it sticks really well, and it's also it's durable. It's very durable, and it's also malleable. So it can flex and bend if it needs to, but it's also resist chipping and hardening in that way.
And how did you get into that? That's really fascinating.
So I graduated from SVA. I studied. I actually studied at the School of Visual Arts.
Okay.
I graduated with BFA in illustration in 2015, and then completed my master's in art education in 2023. But in 2015, around that time, before then, I think I may have learned about oil painting in 2012.
Okay.
Very recently. And before that, I was interested in comic books and cartoons, and I always thought I would kind of be like a comic book artist. And then I learned about oil painting at LaGuardia Community College, and it like exploded, opened up a whole new world for me, of possibilities, and I learned about art history, and I had been to museums before, but I had never actually taken the time to look, to really look at the work, to really see the work. I think a lot of time we go to museums. I know in my experience, I've gone to museums and kind of looked and, marveled at the beauty and, but when I started attending classes at SVA, I was forced into a position where, for one, I always had this analogy of like being a big fish in a small pond. At LaGuardia, I was an artist that, was a much smaller school. It had a smaller art department. If I knew how to draw really well, I started to learn about oil painting, and there I was kind of celebrated as like someone who knew how to draw really well, someone who could paint efficiently. And then when you move into SVA, now you're here where everyone is an artist. Yeah. So now you're just a small fish in a big pond in the ocean, and there I had to really push myself, to focus on techniques, to focus on, to combine everything that I'm learning and to make sense of it and to make it hopefully into something substantial. And then that put me in a place where if I'm going to see art, I better be really thinking about it, and paying attention to it and taking my time, and also forcing myself to pay attention to it and not just, looking at it and saying, wow, this is beautiful, So I have to think about it in several contexts, in a historical context and the context of application, what's the medium that the artist chose to work with? Why did they choose to use that medium? how are they applying the medium? What's the social context? Hopefully if it's something from antiquity, what were they doing back then? Why is this person depicted like this, or why is this object depicted like this? So there's so many different layers that go into just looking at a work, that I've learned from having been at SBA and pushing myself to consider how I'm gonna work, and how I'm gonna, what I'm hoping to get across with my own work.
That's beautiful. And do you have any like dream projects that you want to do without like thinking of budget or like time restraint? If there's anything like you can do and have complete freedom, no budget?
I don't know. I'm not. I mean, a lot of what I'm doing is discovering and kind of learning and going along as I go. And I do tend to write down a lot of my ideas and a lot of my thoughts. I feel like right now I'm kind of working on my dream project.
Yeah. Oh wow, that's beautiful.
I don't, I haven't. Again, I'm relatively new to contemporary art, so I haven't had any project that I felt like would be a dream project. Just in my experience, just being here is, is a dream come true. I'm in a studio where the vast majority of artists here are much more established. There's so many artists here who have really good ideas, have beautiful work, and such a huge variety of work that for me, just being able to be included in this setting is, says to me that someone has recognized my ability and that I'm moving in the right direction. So it's not so much that I have a project that I felt like would be a dream project. I just want to continue working. I just want to continue moving forward with the ideas that I have and sort of editing those ideas. Every once in a while I come up with an idea that I think is great. And then, maybe I've realized that someone else may have done something similar, or maybe I realized that the idea may not be as great as I thought it was. And I just want to hold on to the ideas that I feel like are worth it and accomplish those ideas. And at one point I wanted to do, I have some paintings here that are more life size, and I would love to continue to work at a larger scale. But I'm also realizing that working at a smaller scale can also be effective. It can also provide a different feeling. Working at a larger scale may be a bit more open.
Yeah.
And working at a smaller scale may be a bit more intimate. So I don't have a project that I feel like is necessarily a dream project. I just want to continue my life's work.
That's beautifully said. Thank you. Really nice. Going back to, you previously mentioned about being incarcerated. Do you think that has impacted your work today?
Absolutely. Yeah. Being incarcerated has absolutely impacted my work. So I don't know. I feel like I'm going to go on a long rant of a story now. So yes, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Unfortunately, raised by a single mother. My mother has, she's done her absolute best to make sure we had all of our necessities. And, my mother's phenomenal. She's been a huge part of my inspiration as an artist and as a person. Unfortunately, I didn't have as much guidance as I probably could have, as a youth. And we lived in conditions of poverty for some time. My family was in and out of shelters, and my mother was receiving public assistance, to take care of me and my siblings. And again, my mother's worked hard also, on her part to overcome those circumstances. But there was a time where I didn't have a lot of guidance, and I started to see things that were going on around me in my neighborhood, and I started to pick up on those things, and wanting to be visible, and wanting to feel like I was somebody, that I was worth something. And those, in a neighborhood where committing crimes or, committing to more negative acts can be seen as you being important because they brought attention, and I hope people would understand, especially like in the context of the internet, where like if you have any kind of attention, negative or positive attention, people are still paying attention.
Yeah.
So, I went along a path that was a bit more irresponsible and definitely more harmful to me and people around me as well. And I didn't complete high school. I was incarcerated. I was in prison and in jail for the first time at 16 years old.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and it was really challenging. It was really challenging, and at the time I kind of saw it as like a rites of passage. I had this like sort of skewed sense that this would somehow make me a man. If I could endure, having been in prison or having been in jail, and if I was tough enough to survive, that would make me a man. And also coming home and going back to those neighborhoods where some of these things at the time were kind of celebrated, not in a sense of like where people felt happy that I was, came home from prison, but where, again, people saw it as, kind of something that made you tougher, made you more manly in that sense. And yeah, it was just not a very good time during my life, a very much more confusing time. And I ended up, dealing with recidivism, going back and forth to prison and going back and forth to jail and then eventually to prison, because jail and prison are two totally different things. And it wasn't until I ended up in solitary confinement for a total of 180 days. And well, it was actually 90 days at a time, 3 months at a time.
Back to back, or
kind of back to back, kind of back to back. I was in my youth, I wasn't very responsible, and I had a lot of like misplaced anger, and a lot of times I would get into fights intentionally so I could be isolated. I'm not the most extroverted. I'm really good, in some environments where, if I have to teach or if I have to be at a gathering, I can perform as an extrovert. I'm pretty good with speaking with people and dealing with people, but in my heart, I tend to like to be alone.
Yeah.
So I would get into fights, and thinking this is going to get me away from people so I can be isolated. And then you get in isolation for so long and you're like, I haven't seen a person's face or heard a person's voice for, clearly for so long, besides like hearing someone muffled screaming, through the gate or whatever the case is. And that becomes, depressing. And I started to focus more on art, more on drawing while I was in prison, and it's particularly in isolation. So it became useful to me in several ways. It became a means of commerce. So in prison, I started to focus on doing portraits for people, and I could do portraits and trade portraits for food, like a bartering system. I could trade portraits for food. I could draw holiday cards. I could draw all of these sorts of different things, and use art in that way to help compensate for things that I didn't have. But then also it served as a means of therapy, and to help me pass the time and escape my situation, my circumstances mentally.
Mentally travel,
Yeah. So and then having so much time and time to fill and space to fill within that time, I kind of put myself through a school in that way, through practice. While I was in isolation, I would just spend hours just drawing that. They give you like 2 or 3 magazines.
Okay.
And I would just spend hours, on my legal pad. I had a little yellow legal pad, and I would just draw faces and hands and just constantly, throughout the day.
Do you have any of those drawings in your possession?
It's been a very long time ago, so I don't have those drawings, but I have a ton of sketchbooks.
Oh wow.
Yeah, those are all sketchbooks. And I'm constantly, if I'm on a train and and I have the opportunity, I'm still practicing in that way. It's a bit separate from, again, doing what I do as an artist with contemporary art. Is not the same as just the immediacy of sketching and drawing someone, but it's still a very therapeutic, thing to do, especially in New York City, where you're on a train and there's so many different personalities and so many different things going on.
Yeah.
It's a way to keep me contained, and it's also a way to escape my circumstances that I'm on this train, and who knows what's going on. It's a way to meet people. It's a way to to be able to communicate with people. It's a way to promote myself as an artist. Every so often I'll meet someone who notices that I'm drawing on a train, and they'll stop me and ask for my Instagram or ask about my work, or if I'm showing anywhere in any galleries, or what I'm doing as an artist. Just people who show interest in me as an artist. So prison helped me along in that way. Another catalyst is I have a son. I have a child.
Congrats!
Thank you.
Well,
he's a lot older now. He's 20 years old now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but at the time when he was born, my father was also incarcerated while I was young. He was in prison while I was young, and I knew that I didn't want my son to deal with those circumstances. So I pushed really hard, to try to find a job and stop, selling drugs and, commit illegal activities in order to have money. And eventually I had to move furniture. I worked at a place called Labor Ready. It was like a temp service workplace. They used to have, before social media and the internet was really popular, you would go into an office and you wait there for a few hours and you hope they have jobs available. And fortunately for me, like the pieces just started falling into place. I worked at this temporary workplace, and they sent me to SVA. They sent me to the School of Visual Arts to move furniture into the dorms. Oh, wow. So I'm moving
the
furniture. The
universe was conspiring to bring you to that place. That's so cool.
So I'm moving furniture into the dorms, and I'm looking at, all of the art.
Yeah.
And when I got there, it was like drawings on the wall, but it wasn't, just like random scribbles.
Yeah.
There was like art. And I could see that there was art, and there was, things being added on to it. So like there was a drawing, and then it looked like someone else did another drawing, but they added on to this drawing.
Oh, wow.
And it was like all the, I went in there and it was like drawings on the refrigerator and drawings all over the wall, but it was so neat. It wasn't just like random, scribbles everywhere. It was like really contained and neat. So I noticed all of these things, and I was really excited about it. And I was just like, where am I? And before this, again, I started out, reading comic books and looking at cartoons, and I have uncles with similar situations. Yeah. They've been incarcerated. They ended up passing away as a result of, circumstances of living circumstances at an early age. But a lot of them collected comic books, and a lot of them would draw, and they kept sketchbooks. And I always said, if I could, I would want to fulfill the dream of, eventually becoming a comic book artist. Because I felt like that was
you still can.
a part of my legacy. Yeah, maybe I'll get there. Maybe I'll get there. And I felt like that would be, something that I could show my family members and friends, the people who came before me that didn't make it as professionals, and they just saw it as a hobby. And I really wanted to push, to go higher in that way. And so I just didn't expect that, I didn't know that they had art colleges. I just didn't even know that, that existed. I mean, I may have seen like commercials, but I didn't know the opportunity was that real. So going into SBA and seeing all those drawings was like, wow, it was like, totally mind blowing.
Yeah.
Totally mind blowing.
That's amazing.
So I applied to SBA. I immediately, once the job was over, I went back within that week. And at the time I was also dealing with some mental health issues. I was in a circumstance where, again, committing a lot of illegal activities, where I saw someone actually get killed.
I'm sorry.
And it affected me in a really bad way, and I ended up going to the hospital for some time for PTSD, and I was at an outpatient program, like a sort of therapy program, and I was, just coming into all these sorts of things, having a son, trying to, figure out my mental health, trying to work, and move forward in life and beyond, my past and having been incarcerated, and trying to make something of myself. And fortunately, the place I was at, they gave me a stipend to apply to SBA. And I applied. I did my best, and I applied. And of course, I was rejected, because of my past. But there was the counselor there told me to apply to a CUNY school, a community college.
Okay.
And I applied to LaGuardia Community College, and I was accepted there. And I saw that as an opportunity, and I worked hard. Again, I completed my GED while I was in prison. So I didn't graduate from high school, got my GED in prison. And I knew that there were some things that I was missing. So I had to take some remedial courses, but I worked really hard, and I ended up on the dean's list at LaGuardia.
That's so cool.
And LaGuardia also really opened me up to a lot of like philosophy, ideas about what's possible as far as career wise. And so I stayed at LaGuardia. I completed my associates at LaGuardia, and SBA has like scouting. They come around, they go to different schools, and they're like, looking for prospective students. And they came back around. They came to LaGuardia. And there was a guy there, and I'll never forget. His name was Chris Jessic. I believe he lives in Shanghai now. He moved to China, but he really, really helped me during that time. He came in and he said, "Look, you have really good work," and he told me, kind of what to put in my portfolio. But he also told me to, not be scared to speak about my past and to talk about my circumstances. And I think that's kind of what I was missing, was not, speaking about that, and in a way that gave an explanation that was more palatable. I was initially ashamed and not, I mentioned it, but I didn't give like an explanation of my circumstances. Yeah. So I applied to SBA again, and I got the Silas H Rhodes Scholarship. So SBA accepted me the second time I applied, and it was probably like I mean, I'm at a place where I'm reaching all of these milestones.
Yeah.
So I'm probably gonna say it again. Like every few years, I have an experience, and I'm like, this is the best thing that ever happened to me in my life.
That's amazing.
So
I feel like the 16-year-old version of you seeing you today would be like so proud of you.
Yeah,
You know,
thank
that's
you.
amazing. It's like the timeline of your life. It's like how kind of like the universe gave you like a visual. Like first when you moved the furniture into SVA, like slowly but surely you're in the right place at the right time.
Yeah,
That's so cool.
yeah. And I mean, even now, like I'm every time I think about it, I feel like, all right, I might start crying.
Yeah.
So,
No, I definitely like hearing everything. I think it's like beautiful. I mean, I was thinking like this would be like a great like screenplay if somebody's listening. Yeah.
maybe I'll get towards
Yes,
this.
you better get those rights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, SVA was phenomenal.
Yeah.
I can't. I mean, everything has a cost, and I know for people who may be watching this, they may say, college costs a lot of money, but the experience that I had there was absolutely worth it. I'm still, paying my college loan debt right now,
Yeah.
but the experience is, there's no way for me to be able to measure it, for me to quantify it with money. The staff at
Priceless,
SVA, yeah, it's totally priceless. The staff at SVA is and this is not, I don't get paid to promote SVA,
Yeah.
but the staff are generally all professional working artists. So you have nearly all of your teachers, nearly all of the professors at SVA, if not all, have been professional working artists or are still professional working artists while they're, doing instruction at SVA. So I had the opportunity to work with real artists, and then also to work with artists whose work that I actually appreciated. Like I'm looking at someone like Stephen Assell, who's a one of my favorite painters, and I remember maybe 2 months before I started attending courses at SVA, I started looking at artists. Again, I discovered oil painting at LaGuardia. So I'm now finding out about all of these artists who use oil paint. And I'm looking and I'm looking and I see Stephen Assell's work and I really like this guy's work. And then I go to a gallery and you see it in person and like, wow, like, this is phenomenal work. And then I get to SVA and I'm looking at the classes and like, wait a minute, this guy's teaching a class here.
Oh, wow.
So I was able to take several classes. I was able to take 3 courses, studying with Stephen Assell.
Yeah.
And he's a phenomenal artist. He's a phenomenal person. He actually, outside of SVA, he has a studio in the city.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he probably has several studios.
Yeah.
He's a big name. And he welcomed several students. He's actually welcomed students to his personal studio and hired a model. And, and we're working outside of class late at night, in this guy's studio and seeing what he's working on and his process outside of the classroom and seeing him just as a person.
So cool, yeah.
So, all of these things really affected me. Like it really, pushed me to be more thoughtful about my work, to try to push myself to be at the peak of what I'm doing. And it also, SVA also offers other classes. I started learning about philosophy, particularly existentialism at LaGuardia, but I was also able to take existentialism courses at SVA as well. Beyond just focusing on art and applying art, they have classes that are theory and all those sorts of things. So I was able to take an existentialism course, and there was another course, and I'm not totally sure of it, but I think it's like so at illustration they have sort of like a backbone course where our focus was called Beautiful Losers. It was called Beautiful Losers. So it's basically, they give you several books.
Okay.
And even though it was focused on illustration, I know that I wanted to focus on a more of a fine art aesthetic at that time. But I needed illustration to help me with the techniques, to help me with composition, with actual drawing, with figuring out how to make my images and get to that point. So I took illustration as opposed to fine art for that reason. But the course, the Beautiful Losers course, also required a lot of reading. So for the first time, I read Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And it was so different from, so much more different from the movies. You know, from what we see in the movies, a lot of like the depiction in the movie is that the monster is actually Frankenstein, and he's not actually the monster. He's not actually, Frankenstein is actually the scientist who created the monster. And he's kind of the bad guy in the book, you know? So it put me in a place to where I had to think about things in a different way. And this combined with my philosophy, I learned a lot about, started reading about Sartre and about Jean-Paul Sartre and about Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche. I may be mispronouncing some of those names.
No, those are tough, yeah.
And most importantly for me, Albert Camus, who is an absurdist. And all of these writings, especially existentialists, you know, writers and philosophers, will also really focus on the importance of having art, you know, of maybe not just making art, but having an appreciation of art. And particularly Camus, where his aesthetic is, you know, your life. You should be using your life as a form of art. You should be designing your life. Where existentialist aesthetics are a lot about choice and about what you choose to do and how you choose to do things. And that is a means of freedom, where we don't have a level of freedom. We're locked into society, you know. So I don't have, let's say, for instance, I'm forgetting the guy's name. There's Thomas. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name.
Okay.
But he talks about being in a state of nature. And if let's say if we didn't have a society, we're in a state of nature and we don't have any rules. I have the right to steal from you. You have the right to steal from me. But until we sacrifice those rights, we agree to sacrifice those rights in a binding contract, a social contract, you know, then we can have a society that comes together. You agree to not kill me. I agree to not kill you, to not steal from you. You agree to not steal from me. And now we can, you know, coincide. And I don't have to be worried about the risk of you, you know, doing anything detrimental to me. But we're also giving up those freedoms. We're also giving up those rights. So while we're doing that, now we also have the freedom of choice and how we're going to react to those things. So we have a sacrifice of some freedom, but then we also have a way of instituting another kind of freedom. And I think when I learned about that as well, it started to inform my art, and it started to inform who I am as a person. It started to, you know, shape me into who I am as a person. But also it called back to sort of like a full circle thing of my experience. I didn't mention this, but I also did some rapping when I was a kid. I used to rap, you know, when I was younger. I performed. I've been on stage a few times. You know, there was a few years where I really thought I was going to be a rapper.
Oh, that's so cool.
And the reason I mention it is because I started to think about rap music. And in the context and through the lens of existentialism and I started to tie these things together. And so, for instance, talking about choice and freedom in that way. So while I was incarcerated, I had to. Jay-Z has a line where he says, "They trap my body, they can't lock my mind. Easily explains how we adapt to crime." And I had that line, in my mind while I was incarcerated. But it's a very existential idea that, I'm incarcerated and I don't have physical freedom in that way, but I have the mental capacity to be free. I can still read. I can still escape, my circumstances through my art. I can choose how I react to, these situations, or how I act within these situations, and not just reacting. So, I had the option to either, and this isn't to take away from anyone else's experience, but I have the option to have been in that cell and continue to be depressed and wither away, or I have the option to say, you know what, let me be strong and let me find ways that I can escape this situation or adapt to this situation. And it also, I'm remembering all these things now. It also calls to mind Nietzsche and, not Nietzsche, Camus again, the myth of Sisyphus. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Sisyphus. He was expelled by the gods. He questioned the gods in the wrong way. They expelled him. They sent him to Hades, and he got down there and he managed to escape Hades. And then when he came back, they're like, there's no way we can get rid of this guy. He keeps getting over on us. What can we do? They trapped him to eternity, where he had to roll a boulder up a hill. And all he can do for an eternity is just continue to roll this boulder up the hill. And once he thinks he's getting to the top, it rolls back down and he has to go back up. So Sisyphus said, you know what? I'm going to fool them again. And how can I fool them? I'll figure out a way to enjoy this. They think they're punishing me, but I'll do, everything I can to make the best of my circumstances. And that for me, even though I learned about this after, while I was in SBA, I learned about Camus and, all these sort of existentialist ideas and authors, I started to realize that these are things that that I'm very much in tune with, and that have been kind of persistent through my life. So they just reinforced it, and they made me a better person, for lack of words, and a little bit more resilient in that way. So I'm very fortunate for SBA tying in all of those ideas and getting me to this point. And from there, I graduated. I studied at SBA. I graduated, completed my BFA in illustration in 2015. But I realized I didn't want to do illustration. Illustration is a lot more taxing than fine art, and it's also a lot of telling other people's stories and I enjoy that as well, but it's also not as free as telling my own story or pushing for my own ideas. And it's much more rigorous. For an illustration, I may need to do 10 thumbnails, and then I have to choose 4 images from those, and then I have to send it to the director. And, and then the director comes back and says, I need you to fix this. I need you to fix that. So there's much less freedom, and it's much more rigorous. You're kind of a workhorse. And I knew that I tend to work at a slower pace, and that I wanted to put more thought into my work. So coming out of SVA, I knew that I didn't want to do illustration, that I wanted to move more into fine art. So I started, as a matter of fact, these are some of the paintings that I completed at SBA in 2015, and during that time I I thought I was doing something original. We learned about like paintings in antiquity and who could afford to pay for paintings, and and I said, I want to go out and paint people who are less fortunate and who couldn't afford to have their portrait painted, and give them some representation.